Welcome to NAR's Level Up, the real story from realtors.
Welcome to Unscripted, Candid Conversations, elevating issues that matter to realtors and communities across America. Today, we're talking about fair housing. I'm Brian Green, here with my colleague Alexia Smokler, Sher Powers, president of the Tennessee Realtors Association, and Jennifer Stevenson, 2022 Fair Housing Policy Committee chair. So, Alexia, tell us, fair housing, what's the history, what's it all about?
Our realtor associations are advocates for members and their businesses. We're also advocates for homeownership, for consumers. Fair housing is about making sure that all consumers can access homeownership without artificial barriers because of who they are. We know that throughout history, home buyers who were qualified, ready, willing, and able to buy a home were locked out. They were stopped from building intergenerational wealth and passing that down through their families. Today, we want to confront those historical barriers and make sure that homeownership opportunities are available to all.
Okay, so Cher, how do we do that?
That's a great question, and I think NAR is working very hard on a next level ACT program in order to accomplish that. I think the education rollouts that are happening, particularly getting states to be aware of how they are making sure that their fair housing program is strong. And after watching what has happened in New York with the Long Island Newsday study, and recognizing that could happen in Tennessee, it could have happened in any state in this country, none of us would have passed any better than what they did. And I think it just goes to say, even if we know the rules, we're really not following them. Because one of the biggest examples is people would explain what fair housing was and then turn around and create a violation.
Yeah, I think that's the trickiest part of this, right? People know the rules. There's been lots of training. We've got over 50 years of a federal law prohibiting this. But we saw in New York, people who either weren't following their training or making mistakes. I mean, Jennifer, when you look at that, like, if this is still happening and we know there's a law that prohibits it, what can we do better? How do we overcome this?
My thought on that is that so much we train about the dates, the history, but we don't talk about the heart of fair housing. We don't talk about the person, the people that we're supposed to treat equally, and how we do that. So people screw up because they start to try to be too helpful, and they're forgetting that this is violating fair housing. They need to treat every consumer equally. Whether they come in and they have that pre-approval letter or they don't have it, we have to have a policy that is equal for everyone, so everyone feels at the end of the day, if they talk, they were treated the same and given the same opportunities. So it's talking about it, admitting it, and also getting outside the memorization and talk about the heart of fair housing.
That's good.
So like we have, Alexia mentioned a history here, right? Where people have engaged in discrimination, people in our profession have engaged in discrimination, government practices that perpetuated segregation and the like. Alexia, where does that leave us today? I hear a lot about the homeownership gap, right? And so are we, through our better practices today, closing that homeownership gap?
Unfortunately, not really. The homeownership gap between Black and white Americans stands at about 30 points, the same as it was more than 50 years ago upon passage of the Fair Housing Act. A lot of that relates to this inability to pass down intergenerational wealth, as I mentioned before. So NAR research shows that white home buyers are more than twice as likely as buyers of color to be able to tap into the proceeds of an existing home for their down payment because their parents and grandparents were able to access home ownership. We have data showing that Black home buyers are 3 times more likely to have to tap their 401k or their pension. They have more student loan debt. This all relates to this history of denial of opportunity. And so we have a lot of work to do.
So if we keep up with the equal professional service, that goes a long way. And is there more?
Well, what we say, Brian, as you know very well, is first do no harm, right? Don't make the problem any worse. So we have to ensure that we're complying with the law. We can't be doing what those agents in Long Island were caught on hidden camera doing. But that's only the first step. And next comes, our policy advocacy, which opens homeownership to more folks. That's revisiting things like a credit scoring system, designed decades ago that doesn't capture people's biggest monthly payments, like their rent and their utilities. How can you assess someone's credit worthiness if you're not looking at those things? And when we've had some success here, the federal government has just announced that they are going to be accepting alternative credit scoring methods that look at some of these other payments. So we continue to advocate for things like down payment assistance and other programs that can help people who are making up for that history, help them catch up.
Well, that speaks a lot to our advocacy. And Jen, the Fair Housing Policy Committee, are these the kinds of things that the committee are looking at? And how do you advance that kind of advocacy through the committee?
So we look at it through policy, and we look at fair lending, lending for all. We look at things, special purpose credit that will help first-time homebuyers, people that are below the average median income in their areas, things that will help them get a little lift, make the payment a little less for them. So some banks will give 0.5% off if they take a homebuyer class, if they participate in a down payment assistance grant program, and it helps make that payment a little less. So it leaves the extra money for the family, for education, for giving the family the extra opportunities.
Okay. And share practically on the ground when, in Tennessee, what are the kinds of things that you're able to do to advance the ball?
I think making sure that we are aware of the different programs that were just mentioned and helping the consumer know that those programs exist. It's really surprising how many programs are not being utilized when they actually exist.
Right.
And the other thing, for example, there has been a pretty big wave in where I live, particularly in Nashville, of investors coming in and buying all of the affordable housing, and then there was the crazy Airbnb market. So all of these people were overpaying for property that could have gone to a first-time home buyer and workforce housing. So people are traveling 45 minutes or an hour to be able to work. And ultimately, we can educate our clients. So one of the things that I work with a lot of investors, where we're coaching our clients to say, look, you're going to be selling some of your rental property. Would you be willing to put in your listing that you're going to give priority to a first-time home buyer? Will you agree to provide down payment assistance? Will you make sure that the property has all the appliances, including a washer and dryer and window blinds, so that the typical expenses that a first-time buyer will experience can be accommodated in a way that makes them more likely to qualify and not get in over their head within a few weeks of home ownership?
Well, we've covered quite a lot of ground here, and I know for all of you being committed to fair housing, we could keep going, but why don't we leave it there? So thank you all for joining me in this conversation. For more information, go to nar.realtor/fair housing.
You've been watching Level Up Fair Housing. Stay tuned for part 2 of the discussion.